Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 312. In today's episode, we'll talk about closure rate metrics. I think this is a really important metric. I think this really shows the workforce how serious that you are in addressing hazards out there, and whether these hazards are found by employees, or are they just part of an everyday audit, are they just part of something that somebody says it's not really a hazard, but here's a better way of operating possibly. So whatever kind of mechanism is going to make it to the list. And of course, you would also say, was this brought by a employee? Was it brought by an audit? Was it one of the keys, of course, is that it has to be somebody in leadership that presents these metrics. It can't be the safety person, because of course the safety person is all about safety. Well, that's naturally what they believe the safety person will talk about. But when it comes from, and this is where it gets tricky, as high of a I hate to call it a rank or a structure or whatever that we want to call it. If you can get a president to present it, a vice president, a director, just whoever can be at the highest level locally present this, because then it shows leadership has buy-in. It's not the safety guy who says this, And I also think it's really important that this is also the very first thing you talk about in meetings also. I should say in the weekly ones, not in the everyday ones, but in the weekly or the monthly updates then. Because we all know that some people will show up and they're only there to hear what they need to hear, and then they leave. So if safety's last, you have a smaller pool. At some point, you may have had, 15, 20, 30 people. You now have like 10 at the very end, because after people hear what they need to hear or say what they have to say, a lot of times they leave. So you have less and less people. If safety is first, they're going to hear that message, that it gets widely distributed as far as it possibly can. But let's get back to the metric itself then. It shows that you're tracking corrective actions. You're looking at what has to be fixed and you're fixing it. So now some of these can get, I don't want to call it tricky, but the person who talks about the metrics has to know the background too. They can't pop up the metrics and say, oh, it looks like this one's open still. Let's go on to the next one. Well, if it's open, there's got to be a reason why it's open. And that's why that you have to document the reasons why as well. Many times we say, oh, we'll fix this, we'll do that. And that sounds awesome on paper. But once we really dive into the details, we find out things like the plan that we have in place. Well, we didn't really plan on it needs one specific part, and that one part's about 2 to 3 months out from coming to us. You know, that doesn't mean that it's not a great plan. Of course, it could be awesome plan. What are you going to do in the interim? How are you going to make it as safe as possible as you're waiting for this part? But you also have to document the reasons why and the timelines, because what you don't want to do, which is a real downer for the workforce, is to have them say every single week there's no update. Well, there is an update. The update is it's going to take 2 to 3 months to get the part. We made it as safe as we can. So when you literally say, the estimated time to fix is going to be, because people need to have a realistic time frame. I myself struggle with this because, as a safety person, I think it ought to be done as quick as possible. And many times it is. But if you can't get the parts and you're waiting for stuff, and of course, not just the parts, but now you got to get all the people there and organized. It's really easy to say safety's first, and we're going to do all this stuff. Well, the maintenance guy's got maintenance stuff to do, production guy's got production stuff to do. So at some point you're pulling them off of maintenance and production and everything else and saying, and to make it safer, I need the following people, I need X hours, and then we're going to go out and make this happen. So I've always gotten that. I just have not done a good job of having a realistic time frame. Um, And that's why that a lot of times I like to just kind of really sit down and document, hey, it's going to take 2 to 3 months. You know, next update will be in 30 days, or next update will be in 60 days. Doesn't mean that you're not doing other things, but what they don't want to hear is again, well, it looks like progress wasn't made this week. Now that's not what leadership is saying. That's what people hear. Like, oh, so I brought this action up, and again, it hasn't been addressed. Well, no, it has been addressed. So sometimes, people don't know the plan. Help them out. Communicate as much as you possibly can out there. So um, it's really important to sit down so people have that realistic time frame. You also have to have an owner, and we'll talk about this in the next following podcast as well. Somebody has to be the champion. Somebody has to be that person that says, "I'm going to get it done. This is my task, my job. I am to update. I am to order the parts. And all that kind of stuff." Then it can't be we're going to sit down as a group, we talk as 5 people, and somehow we make this thing happen. That would be really awesome if that happened a lot, but somebody has to be the champion. Somebody has to be the person that says, I'm going to run the project. I'm going to tackle this task. I'm going to do that kind of stuff. But let's sit down and wrap it up. I'm starting to drone on at this point then, but closure rate, really super important. It's also important that if you can get the highest person in management locally to sit down and talk about that, and whether you're doing a meeting every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever the interval is, they are the person that talks about it. In an ideal world, they also talk about it first. It's not, we're going to go over all of the metrics, and then if we have time, because we always go late, we'll talk about safety. It always has to be first because more and more people are there before they start to disperse. So, and with that, let's wrap it up. I want to thank you for joining me. If you get anything out of these podcasts, please like, share. My whole goal is I want everybody to be better than I was as a safety professional. So, still doing it now. Got a couple of years before I hang up my hat, but a lot of lessons learned the hard way. I want folks to profit from my pain, sit down and say, um, this is what I use. Now, of course, everything I talk about will not be 100% applicable to every plant out there, but it's a strategy that you can sit down and say, how could I make this strategy? Or I'm struggling with a problem. Here's another way of looking at the same problem. So with that, let's wrap it up. Thank you for joining me. My name is Dr. David Ayers. Have a safe day.